Welcome everyone. We'll kickstart in a minute or two. We'll just wait for everyone to get in. Right, let's kickstart this. So welcome everyone. My name is Holly. I'm the MD of BIMA. This is our, I've lost count how many BIMA Hangouts. It's we must be in double figures by now. So BIMA Hangouts is something that we kick-started at the beginning of lockdown with the idea of helping, well, providing you with some clarity amidst the noise. So please do let us know if they are doing that, if we're being helpful. Any feedback is also if you think of topics that we're not covering, we're turning these around pretty quickly, and we're very keen to cover off anything and everything that you feel would help support you at this time. So this is our second mental health and wellness session over the last few weeks. We've got some old faces and a new face, which is always good. Old faces are good too, obviously. So before I hand you over to Ant and then to Nancy, who will be hosting today, I just wanted to briefly mention what we've got coming up next week. So we have our kind of weekly leaders or senior leaders roundtable, which is all around basically sharing your current challenges and hopefully getting some of them solved and helping to solve others. So I think that's on Thursday morning. We have an education roundtable for educators. So if you know any, send them our way, all around how they've kind of done this insane job of moving everything online. We're really interested to know how that has happened and the processes and methods and technologies used. So I'll be really looking forward to the output of that. And last but by no means least, we have Martha Lane Fox joining us on Thursday evening. That will be our second an audience with. We did one last night with Tom Cheesewright, which was brilliant. So she's doing a Q&A with Tarek, our co-president, on, she sits on the board of, let alone lastminute.com, etc. She now sits on the board of Twitter, of Chanel. She obviously founded .everyone. So I think she's going to have a really interesting take on all of this and what everyone is calling the new normal, trying to stay away from these these buzzwords. So today is going to be led by Nancy Rowe. Nancy is the head of inclusion and diversity for Publis Sapient, but she is also, much more importantly, I would say, the chair of our Inclusion and Diversity Council, and doing an amazing job. And we're really looking forward to the outputs for the next few months. So before I hand over to Nancy, Ant is just going to tell you a little bit about how today's going to work. Ant.
Thank you, Holly. And just a quick thing, if you guys missed any of the previous sessions, you can actually re-watch them all on our BIMA YouTube channel. With this session, we want to make sure it's interactive, as interactive as possible. You should be able to see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you have a burning question you'd like to ask our wonderful panel, make sure you click on that, type the question in, and then all of our panel can see it. If we get to the end of the session and you have a burning question that hasn't been answered, the lovely Ross Taylor from this talk will actually be live on Twitter answering questions for 30 minutes. So yeah, so you keep an eye on that. That's at BIMA. So after this event, make sure you go to at BIMA, and then Ross can answer any of your burning questions that didn't get answered on this talk. But that's enough of me. Nancy, if you want to kick us off, that would be fantastic.
Great, many thanks, Ant. Good morning, everyone. Hope you are well this morning. Thank you for joining us for this second talk about mental health and well-being during COVID-19 crisis. I'd like to introduce you first of all to the panelists that we have with us this morning, and if I could ask each of our panelists to indicate who you are as I say your name, so we can go through that way. We have Ross Taylor, who is co-founder of Hidden, whose mission is to create talent, Hidden that is, and Ross's, a mission to create talent and culture strategies for a better working world. This is enabled through Hidden's mobile app, which removes bias from the hiring process whilst increasing efficiency. Ross is also the co-founder of Parents, a job sharing platform for returners wanting to work more flexibly in digital. Ross is passionate about mental health and well-being in the workplace and was recently confirmed as a role model on the 2020 Inside Out leaderboard of business leaders who share their personal stories and speak out about mental health in the workplace. Welcome, Ross. Second, we have in our lineup today is Dan Willis, and familiar face to some of you also from Studio Republic and Wellgood. Dan is recognised in the BIMA 100 as someone shaping the UK digital industry. He's a lead strategist for Studio Republic, who works with a number of global brands and charities, helping them navigate their purpose in digital. He's also the founder of the Wellgood AI app, which helps businesses detect and manage mental health within their workforce before it hits crisis point. Dan is also a mental health campaigner and an ambassador for Mind in the Southwest. Good morning, Dan. And then last but not least, we have the amazing Michelle Morgan, co-founder of Livity and of course founder of PJoys, also an ambassador and instructor for mental health First Aid England. Michelle is on a mission to take mental health and into everyday conversations, mostly in her pajamas. See at PJoys to find out why. Yeah, I had a look at the site yesterday, it's fantastic. A contributor to the BIMA Tech and Inclusion Report 2019, and also co-founder of Livity, who were the proud winners of the Grand Prix at BIMA Awards 2017. Good morning, Michelle. Great. So before we start the conversation this morning, we thought we would like to take a poll with all of our participants on the webinar, and I'm going to ask Ant or Elise to perhaps show us these two questions. So we have two polls, which should hopefully be appearing on screen. So the first one is, how are you feeling today? And we've got kind of red, amber, green, just as a quick indicator of where you might be at. If you can participate, okay, in that quick poll. And then there's also a second question, because we have those who are quite subject matter experts in relation to mental health and first aid. It's also quite useful for us to get a feel for how many of you are potentially mental health first aiders already. So also interesting to know about the extent to which that is a thing now in the UK digital industry. So are you a mental health first aider? Great. So super. Okay, so let's kick off. Just to give you an overview of what we're going to be covering this morning, just so you can get a feel for how quickly we're moving through the topics. We've got up to 11 o'clock, and we're first going to do a little bit of a retrospective since we had our first webinar on March the 27th around this very same topic. Then we're going to do a quick recap for those of you who perhaps didn't have the opportunity to catch the first webinar, really just talking specifically about spotting the signs of mental health and some very practical coping strategies we can all employ. And then we're going to move into a bit more of the theoretical side of kind of mental health and well-being management, talking about the topic of stress containers and 5 ways to well-being, before we kind of think about, you know, if we are going to be in this for the long term, for the kind of foreseeable future, at least for the next few months, how should we manage our expectations, and what can we proactively do and positively do to cope with this situation? Throughout, we'll be checking the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, so please do remember to participate. If you've got any questions as we go through, we'll try to keep an eye on those. Okay. So first of all, I was going to ask each of the panelists in turn. So I'll kick off with you first, Ross. You were very kindly part of the first panel on the 27th of March. And I think when I think back to that time, it was all kind of, we were in only kind of 1 or 2 weeks into this. And I think dealing with the initial shock of what the reality of lockdown looked like, felt like. How do you feel that has changed really in the last sort of four weeks or so? And how has that played out in your business and experience?
First of all, thank you for having me back again. Great to be part of this with brilliant panelists. I think for me, I've seen a couple of key changes in that period since our last session, which hopefully we'll go into more detail in this session today on both these things. I think the first thing, I'm going to start with a positive, which is I think I'm continually fascinated by the evolving work cultures that we see both in Hidden's partners and in the wider industry. I think it's become really clear, obviously, that increased flexibility is possible, that people can be productive working from home. So I think that's smashing some outdated stigmas. But also, I think there's a real positive that's going to come out of this, the increased focus on mental health in the workplace and for employees. And I think work cultures are very quickly having to adapt. I think they're becoming more vulnerable. I think they're becoming kinder. I think they're becoming more empathetic. And I think that's really a positive for me that we're going to see into the long term. I think the second thing that's massively changed since we last came together is that most of us are now familiar with this concept of furlough. I think HMRC released some numbers yesterday. There are around 430,000 companies that have now applied for the furlough scheme through the HMRC website, which went live on Monday, and 3.2 million workers already on that scheme. So I think that's having sometimes a very dramatic effect on people's mental health, but also something I think we need to consider now in this conversation that's very much part of what's going on in the world.
Yeah. And is that sort of a similar sort of thing that you've also seen, Dan? I know that you, in the work that you do in relation to mental health and wellbeing, perhaps have a number of contacts. That have you seen any change in their kind of demeanour over the last the last few weeks? Has there been a significant kind of change for you?
I have seen quite a positive change. I think what this has done is actually brought a lot of people together. There is a sense of togetherness and accepting that, you're going to have a 4-year-old, as probably my 4-year-old will jump into this call, come into a meeting. I was having a conversation with one of our US partners, and similarly that it was quite an intense conversation, but we had children popping in, even though you just can't avoid it, and there is this accepting of it. But
okay, and sorry.
But yeah, also I just think that with the communication that's coming out from the government, around furlough, it's now come to the light of what that actually means. I think that people actually started understanding, actually started to be more clear in how they can actually move forward. So that's really positive.
Yeah, I had before I told you, Michelle, I had a bit of a low point the other evening when the chief medical officer kind of announced this kind of, the reality is we're going to be in this situation until potentially the end of the year. And I really did notice that for like at least 12 hours after that, I was, quite in a sort of state of shock. But do you feel that things have changed in what you've been witnessing amongst the people that kind of you work with, and how people are coping sort of as this has gone through the last few weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how much can actually change and move in a 4-week period, isn't it? So the thing that I really echo what both Dan, Ross, and yourself have said, Nancy. The thing that's really struck me is, when we arrived in the crisis, I think a lot of us who work in the space of mental health and really knew that this was going to be a massive crisis of mental health as well as our physical health. We were reaching out really quickly to our clients, to our networks, and there was a lot of desire to put help and support in, and a lot of that has happened. It's how I generate the bulk of my income. So there's training that I deliver, and in the first 3 weeks, the amount of conversations I had, and one person actually used these words: "I'm really sorry, Michelle, you know how much I care about and value the importance of mental health training, but currently that comes under my non-essential spend budget." And I nearly wept when I got that response. But what I've noticed is in the last 5 working days, kind of as we were talking about this on our call yesterday, weren't we? As people are moving through the grief curve, you've got denial, anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance, and we can use that as a reference point for our own emotions and responses right now. I'm seeing that people, clients, individuals are now starting to look at and remembering that they really need to invest in mental health and well-being now, to support the now, but also the long time, as for human beings, but also for business.
Fantastic. Yes, and you're right to raise the point around kind of, I think it is in the context of the economic sort of impact of the crisis that we're also sort of seeing responses to mental health and well-being across organisations sort of being affected somewhat. So just to kind of track back a little bit to the previous discussion we had, and just in case some of the participants weren't able to be with that, we kind of had a very kind of brief discussion at the outset around spotting the signs of poor mental health. And I wondered, Dan, whether you could kind of kick off sort of some really kind of practical advice for kind of how can you really tell when someone's having the difference between someone having a bit of a bad day and potentially then, you know, being on track for something a lot more serious.
No, definitely. I think, well, we touched on it quite a lot in the previous webinar, but things have moved on quite dramatically. We're in week 4 now, and a lot has actually come to light. So, you know, during this outbreak, we have seen an increased amount of anxiety and stress. You know, as I said, childcare, bottlenecks in production, you know, simply being away from your co-workers, all these things, you know, have been, you know, quite stressful and you know, inducing anxieties amongst individuals. And it is important how we do recognize how this will affect our mental health. I spoke previously about how within my business, we've been looking at noticing warning signs and looking at it and comparing it to our usual framework of spotting things like presenteeism, absenteeism, and leaverism. However, you know, it has become quite a difficult thing, and there are certain key characteristics that I would really, as a manager, sort of just ensure that people are looking out for and keeping an eye on. Those areas, you know, uncharacteristic mistakes, you know, this probably is the most obvious. You know, one sure sign that people are starting to burn out working remotely is when they make more mistakes and miss more deadlines than normal. So people don't typically perform as well in high stress states as they do in more relaxed frame of mind. And that stress can often manifest in maybe sloppy or inaccurate late work. So these are things within your staff that you can really sort of keep an eye on. Language potentially coming more negative. So when people are feeling stressed, it's common for their language, whether in email, phone calls, you know, your face-to-face Zoom meetings that we're having, becoming more negative or even more emotional. This can come across as things like being more short-tempered, having outbursts of anger, complaining about how tired they are or not slept. Very common ways to actually spot those signs, especially when we may not be able to see, you know, full body language of that individual. You know, I could be wearing my pajamas underneath this t-shirt and you wouldn't necessarily know. So within communication, we can really start identifying and spotting those early warning signs before they may manifest into something that is something leading to crisis. And then things like appearing to be distracted or becoming more chaotic and erratic, working from their bed. That's one thing which we've really discouraged amongst our team. You know, it was very difficult to begin with when we all went into remote working, that people hadn't set up their offices, so they were working from their bedrooms. But it's really important to encourage that they're not sleeping, working, eating in that same area, even if it is, say, 5 foot away from their bed, you know, because I appreciate not everyone's got space. It is really important to have that change in mindset, just to be positive and be able to disconnect at times. But yeah, really, those 3 sort of areas, I would really suggest are great areas to start spotting the early warning signs.
Yeah, it's great. And I think you're right in that there has been a real change in sort of, we weren't really used to this new way of working when we had the talk on the 27th of March. And I think that certainly that whole separation between work and life, at least in trying to have that physically in your home, is sort of something that's quite widely spoken about now, more so than a few weeks ago. However, Ross, I was going to ask you kind of, I've been having some conversations over the last few days where people just feel like everything is all happening in the same place. There's kind of, it's not about sort of work-life balance. It's just this sort of continuous sort of, appear to be working a lot harder because we're trying to work out how to work under these new conditions, but the days seem to be a lot longer. Are there any kind of, you know, speaking about sort of some of the coping strategies maybe that people can employ to sort of mitigate some of these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to Dan's point that he was just making about spotting those signs, I think one of the things that we discussed yesterday when we were all together, which is important to raise, is the time frame of looking for those signs. You know, I think Michelle was making a great point that normally you think about maybe 2 weeks, but everything's getting shorter and kind of more aggressive at the moment. And I think down to a period of a week, if someone's starting to display those signs, then you really need to move to action and encourage that person to seek support. So I just think it's important everybody kind of moves their mindset a little bit in terms of timings.
We had a bit of a chat yesterday about people being quite reluctant to seek support at the moment, though, because they don't want to go to the doctor. They don't want to go, you know, kind of, should they still be thinking about going to the doctor with mental health issues or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Hugely important that they do, and I think that's part of an employer's responsibility, actually, to remember that even, and this includes furlough workers, they are still an employee, and that employee is still entitled to all the same benefits and support as if they were physically in the office. So a lot of organisations will have employee assistance programs or other types of mental health support. So I think it's also on the employer to make sure that everybody is aware of the channels of support that they can go through. And I think we will probably drop some more into the chat during this webinar, but there's lots of resources online, and I'm sure Michelle can talk more about that as well. In terms of those individual coping strategies, we went through a lot last time around routine and the importance of keeping routine and maintaining a transition in and out of work. I think you're right. I think people's working days are getting longer. So I think what's important for that is actually this concept of boundaries, and having boundaries with your employer or your co-workers around what is your work time and what is your personal time. I mean, for me, as a dad of 2, those boundaries are always blurring, actually, and I find myself on calls with the kids and vice versa with my wife. But I try very hard to commit to boundaries and to be present to doing one thing or the other, which I think really helps. The other thing in terms of strategies, I think it's important that we follow up on now is this concept of kind of what is the employer's responsibility. Now we've moved from these early stages of frantic kind of communication and community building, which is still important. We all need to do that, but I think everybody probably on here has been on or been invited to a pub quiz or some kind of virtual social gathering to maintain community. those things need to continue, because that's really important. And I've got a list of what we've seen across all of our partners here, which I'm just going to stick into the chat just to give people some ideas of things that they can continue to do. But I think the employer support and responsibility is getting bigger than that now, as we move into accepting that this is still happening, and it could well go on that we're working in this situation for the foreseeable. So I think the important things now are actually defining people's purpose. I think workers become more productive when they have purpose and when they're working remotely. And one of the concepts we're starting to introduce in our team at Hidden, and also we're seeing in some of the organisations that we partner with, is artificial goal setting and the creation of project teams. So people are working together towards a purpose and a goal, and that's giving people a really positive work experience, which obviously aligns itself to positive mental health. So I think that that's a great thing to think about with your teams and how you can do that. I think leadership now really has to change and look at itself to become more human. I think anybody that's working with an employer or has that relationship has to consider their forms of communication now to become far more authentic. I think we're seeing a bit of anxiety in managers and a bit of vulnerability actually that needs to be taken care of and recognised at the moment, because they don't necessarily feel 100% equipped with those skills and to manage that way, which is often a new management style for people. So I think leaders at the top of organisations need to be aware of that and provide the level of support to managers to be able to deliver those coping strategies for their teams. And then down to the individual, just a couple of things that we didn't talk about last time, which we're starting to kind of help people with now, is the first is, particularly for furloughed workers, is starting to think about gratitude practice and potentially journaling your experience and thinking about questions like, what am I grateful for today? What's been a challenge for me today? And just spending some time getting that down can really help with your mental health at the end of the day and the kind of transition out of the day. And then the second thing which furloughed workers can do, which ties with the employer's responsibility, is the concept of learning. There were some notes from a global LinkedIn leadership forum last week that the most searched learning things on LinkedIn now are mental health and well-being. And it's hugely responsible for employers to create curriculums of learning for people while they're on furlough, because they'll feel positive, developing new skills, they'll feel engaged, they'll feel a sense of community. So it's really key, I think, that everybody takes time and uses this opportunity to maintain routine and kind of upskill and feel positive that they're adding value.
Great. No, super. Thanks so much, Ross. That's really great. So, and going back to what Michelle was saying, now is not necessarily the time for cutting all spend in relation to learning and development and mental health and well-being. Michelle, I know that you've done a lot of work in this space, so I know that you were going to be sharing with us some kind of frameworks this morning that kind of we could perhaps share with everyone on the webinar to kind of think about how, something as a takeaway that we can kind of use to manage the situation on a daily basis. Do you want to speak a bit more about those?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nancy. I'm timing myself. I've got 10 minutes apparently for this section. I have to time myself, otherwise I'll be in all kinds of trouble. So it's really good to be here with everyone on the panel and everyone tuning in. In 2017, I burnt out physically and mentally, and then what followed after that was a period of depression and anxiety. And for me, depression, in short, was feeling nothing, and anxiety was feeling everything. And it's important to say there are lots more signs and symptoms that go with those two illnesses, and they can present themselves in different ways for different people. So there's not a one size fits all in terms of signs and symptoms, but for me, kind of all or nothing felt a useful way to sum it up. A key moment for me was reading about someone else's depression. And that for me was the start of getting help. And so it was the beginning of heading towards recovery, and I did recover. And along the way, in a moment of brilliance meets madness, The pajamas that I couldn't get out of for all the wrong reasons became my inspiration. And I started a pajama company called PJoys, which is all about making mental health an everyday conversation. And here they are. Good background, huh?
Amazing.
So there were 3 things. Stigma stopped me from talking and asking for help. As I stepped out of my business, I was told it was a bit awkward when I talked about my mental health. That was silencing, and I did stop talking. For me, connecting with someone else's story was a game-changing moment. It helped me start talking about how I was feeling and ask for help. It made me feel less alone. And out of a personal crisis came something really good, something really purposeful, which is often the way when we experience the down times, even moments of crisis, whether it be personal or global. So I just want to kind of give that moment of hope that we'll all experience something good at some point out of these really, really challenging times. All feelings are valid right now. We'll all be feeling our feelings in different ways on different days. And this so-called new normal is a volatile and emotional place to be adapting to. We're all in it. We're all adapting in different ways on different timelines. So be kind to yourself and be kind to others, because we'll be in different moods and states, you know, maybe hour to hour. And we kind of have to be tolerant at the moment. Your starting point, I know that lots of people will be on this call because they want to look after others, but your starting point must be you. You are not equipped to look after the mental health and well-being of others if you're not aware of and looking after your own. So what I'm hoping now is some very speedy gallop through 3 ideas that you can then take away and play with yourselves will be helpful. Elise, can we put the presentation up, please? Here it is. Okay, Elise, you're gonna click when I say click. It's a sophisticated code. Okay, can you click, please? Okay, so everyone can see the triangle here. This stress container is not something that I have created. It's very much out in the world. It's sometimes called the stress container. It's sometimes called the stress bucket. So if you look at the triangle, that represents the container, the bucket, and everyone has a different size container or bucket, and that kind of demonstrates the size of your vulnerability. And the size of our vulnerability is unique to each and every one of us, and lots of things contribute to that. How we were born, where we were born, what our parenting was like, where we grew up, the state of our health then, the state of our health now, big things that have or haven't happened to us in life, our education, genetics, and more. It's what makes us beautiful, unique individuals. But as a result, our vulnerability varies. Can you click? So the container is a way of saying that the container holds our stress, and everyday stress flows into our containers or buckets. And stress can look like lots of different things. If we have more time, we do a bit of interaction, maybe use the chat to give your ideas for what stress looks like. And what I would stress when talking about stress is that stress isn't just bad things or difficult things. Stress can just be simply the breadth of everything that's going on in our lives. So for me, parenting is magical, but it also can be really stressful. Being an entrepreneur is joyful, but it is painful in equal measure. So we want to be able to manage our container and ensure that the stress doesn't overflow. So click, please, Elise. So Ross was talking us through some of the coping strategies that we can begin to employ and try out to help us manage our stress. And you'll see there's a little valve or tap light thing there. And when we're using those helpful coping strategies well, then the stress has somewhere to flow out. Click. When stress starts to build, often we turn to unhelpful coping strategies. Maybe with helpful coping strategies and unhelpful, you could put some of your examples or what you think the examples are in the chat. So helpful coping strategies for me would include exercise and talking and having boundaries around how much I work. Unhelpful coping strategies is you know, when I start working way too much, that extra email, and suddenly I've done 3 more hours. In the past, it would have been opening and finishing a bottle of wine on my own every night. The problem is when we're employing those unhelpful coping strategies, the stress flows up and spills out of the container. And that's what we want to avoid. Click, please. And so that's when problems develop. And we all have an emotional snapping point, every single one of us. We might not always reach it. There will be some people who will amazingly get through life without that big snap happening, but they will still experience the ups and downs of life. But everyone has an emotional snapping point. Click, please. So there'll be some signature stress indicators that you will experience when your stress levels are rising, and maybe when you're not really using lots of your helpful coping strategies, and maybe you're relying too much on unhelpful ones. And Dan took us through some of those signatures, and we'll find that some of them are kind of slightly changing in the current situation. So this can be useful for you just trying to connect in with yourself and start to know when you need to start looking after yourself and bringing in some of the more of those helpful coping strategies. Wow, I'm really running out of time. Okay, go on to the next slide. We'll do this one really quickly. So these are the 5 ways to wellbeing. We'll share a link. This was created by the New Economics Foundation. And on first look, they might look a little bit passive. Be active. You know, this is about moving. This is about exercising, even in lockdown. Yeah, the message here is do what you can, do what you enjoy. Don't feel the pressure to sign up for the 5K challenge if that's not what feels right for you, but do try and move on a daily basis. Connecting is so important. Connecting with yourself, your friends, your peers, and the community. These are the pillars that we need to build so much of our mental strength and well-being upon. Taking notice. So kind of taking notice, stopping. This is a bit like when people say, you know, I really want to be working, living in the present. That does take hard work, actually. But if you can create moments where, you know, you're noticing what the weather is like or isn't like outside. You're noticing what you're eating, or you're creating a sense of kind of being here rather than in your head. It helps you get out of your head. Keeping learning. Ross mentioned this. This is really, you know, this might be really hard for people at the moment, but actually the truth is we're all learning, because we're all having to learn how to operate in a new space and in new ways. But if there are things that you can, you know, feel like you can take opportunity of this moment to learn a new skill or revisit a skill maybe that you haven't exercised for a while. I've returned, my poor family, I've returned to trying to play the piano, which is really painful for them, but joyful for me. Finally, give. Feeling purposeful, giving your time, your words, your presence. It doesn't have to be big, but, you know, who could you call today? Who could you check in with? Next slide, please. Half a minute to go. So this is something that I've been working on in terms of, you know, how can we kind of create an acronym, a little bit of a loose framework to help people ask for help and get help. Because what we know, and this is evidence, when you ask for help and you start getting help, you will move into a place of recovery more likely and more quickly. So if your mental health, or you see someone else's mental health, is consistently poor or consistently deteriorating, and as Ross said, that might be more quick, might be happening more quickly at the moment. You've got to try. Oh, there we go. You've got to try and, oh no, this happened the other day. It stops. It doesn't stop. Right. Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to ask for help. So, you know, being aware on a daily basis of how you are feeling and how you are coping, remembering that you're not alone, you're not a burden. So saying how you're feeling out loud, you'll probably find that there's someone else out there that has experienced that. Asking for help from someone you trust. If that's not someone that you know, the Samaritans are there. 111 is there. Don't feel like you can't reach out to the NHS at the moment. You're not a burden. If you are unwell, you must ask for help. We talked a little bit about vulnerability. It's not a weakness, it's a strength, but absolutely to Ross's point, I think if we are encouraging vulnerability, we also need to do some training support in terms of how we respond to vulnerability. And finally, explore what is helpful. We are all different, especially so when it comes to our mental health. So, you know, try again if the first thing doesn't work for you, and try and be really open to trying new things. Slightly over, I'm very sorry. Hope that was helpful.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Michelle. Yeah, I love the round of applause. Actually, round of applause Ross is giving in the background there. You know, it's great. And Daniel, one of our participants, has commented in the chat, you know, talking about when you are sort of trying to manage different levels of stress. On the one hand, you know, he recognizes this kind of tunnel vision mode where you just seem to be like entirely focused on one thing and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But then on the other hand, you know, another cause of stress can be when you're not really living in the present. If you're trying to look to the future and things that you can't yet control, or the past and trying to find things in comfort from the past. I think there's been some discussion around resilience, really. I don't know whether you're familiar with kind of the thought of how to build resilience, and I've heard that you do build resilience by knowing how you have coped with other moments of crisis in your life, big and small, and kind of reflecting on those and knowing that you did actually, you know, at the time it seemed like it was a real storm, but looking back on it, you got through it. Time passed, you managed to get through that, and that kind of is the fuel for resilience in the present, knowing that even though it may be feeling incredibly hard right now, that you kind of will get through this period, especially with the help of others. I was going to ask Michelle, yesterday we spoke a little bit about kind of different foundation layers of support for mental health and well-being, and we were sort of saying, you know, perhaps the stress containers and the 5 ways to well-being are sort of like a foundation layer. But if organizations are kind of presented on the present in the participants today, and we're thinking about sort of the second line being maybe mental health first aid qualified individuals, etc., what are those kind of layers really, do you think, that we should be thinking about?
Yeah,
provision.
Absolutely. I don't think I have the full answer here, so Dan and Ross, please jump in. But I think it is about, you know, that base point is the 5 ways to well-being. And but although that seems, you know, on first look a bit passive sometimes, you know, why is it so hard for so many of us to do those things? Because actually, you know, they are really effective, and sometimes the things that are best for us are sometimes quite difficult to embrace. And it is evidence-based in all of those 5 points. So they're a very strong foundation for us all. Mental health first aid is great for when conversations feel like they're escalating, or signs and symptoms feel like you can see them escalating in someone. Yeah, if you have mental health first aiders and those skills, you know, that can be a very effective way to start asking direct questions quite quickly. Back to the point Ross and I were discussing about, we need to act more quickly if we see signs and symptoms at the moment, because people are isolated, because it feels like, I don't have evidence for this, but it feels like things may escalate more quickly. So mental health first aiders are great. You can't do that course online at the moment, but I have a sneaky feeling it might come online in some way. But there is the mental health awareness, and that is a half-day training, and that takes some of the first elements of mental health first aid training. Again, I think Dan and Ross were advocating, yeah, if we can invest in our own knowledge and understanding of mental health, we can look after our own better, but also that of others. And then I would say, you know, asking direct questions. If, you know, our intuition is an amazing thing, you know, it really is, that the sixth sense, it is a thing. And often we have that kind of gut feeling that something's not right with someone. So ask, don't worry so much about asking in the wrong way, the right way. If you want to ask, if you're having that feeling, it probably means that you care, you're a caring person. So ask them if they're okay, ask twice, you know, let them know that you're there to support them non-judgmentally. if they want to talk. And if you are very worried about them, you do need to find ways of escalating it. And if you're in a business or a talent team, know and communicate what those levels of escalation are. And if you think someone is in a suicidal crisis, you have to call the emergency services.
Ross and Dan, did you want to kind of add any thoughts to those points? How about you, Ross?
Yeah, I think I was just not necessarily to talk about an actual construct that you can kind of move through, but more just the kind of shift in mentality that you need, I think, with your friends, with those around you, and with your employees, is that everybody is experiencing something different right now, and that's totally okay. And that journey on that kind of continuum of mental health can change in a day. They can be good and bad in the same day. And I think there has to just be a recognition that everybody has mental health, but everybody's needs right now and circumstances are different. So I think employers have to be far more bespoke with their response. They have to be communicating with people and asking, what do you need from us? And the same way, with your friends and your friendship groups, if you haven't heard from people for a while, everyone has their own individual circumstances and needs, and it's essential that you have to be more human and be more kind at the moment.
Yeah.
And just to reiterate a lot of those points, I think as a manager or a leader, encourage reflection within your organization, within your teams. We spoke about those one-to-ones, spotting those signs. And actually, if you're meeting with your staff regularly, ask those open questions. Ask out, compared to how you felt, 2 months ago or a month ago, have you found yourself, having difficulty concentrating or loss of interest in things that you used to enjoy? By asking direct questions, you're able to gauge that very quickly. Hopefully that trusted relationship that you have with that individual is there. And then by actioning it as well, you'll actually hone in a lot of respect, from that individual. Action is really important at this point. But there's so much out there from an educational point of view. Mental health first aid, they've got a huge amount of information, same with Mind, but yeah, like with regards to like a lot of charities out there like Mental Health First Aid and also with Mind, their income is dramatically decreased, and if we can support them by supporting our own businesses, and helping our businesses in this time of crisis, then it really just makes sense, not only from a social care point of view, but actually from an economic point of view as well.
Yeah, it's great. And I think that a lot of the resources, there've been lots of resources shared now over news channels as well, really, around mental health and first aid. It does appear, sort of gauging also, just wanting to ask any of our participants if they have any questions that, we've got 10 minutes remaining. So if you would have any very specific questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A. But I think compared to the number of questions that we got at the last call, either we did a really good job or everyone's a lot more well informed now, really, at least kind of at a fairly rudimentary level about sort of their sort of mental health and well-being, and certainly those 5 ways to well-being. I wanted to kind of like just touch on kind of then, if we're going to be in this for the next sort of 3 months, what emerges in terms of the Holly won't like us using the phrase new normal, and this kind of the new way of working, and what are the positives that we might be able to take from what has been really quite a difficult situation? What kind of positives would you hope to see in the way that we work together in digital business going forward, that we retain maybe after the crisis has finished? Ross, shall I start with you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nancy. Well, I think the first positive to consider is what I mentioned at the start, is this kind of continued rapid evolution of workplace culture. I think we're going to all benefit from the environments that we're going to go back into at some point. That they will be more open, there'll be more vulnerability, and I think there'll just be better work cultures and better places to work and to spend your time. I think also we'll see more people with more clarity around what their own why is, and what their own purpose is. And if people are doing purpose-filled work for themselves and are feeling motivated, then that's obviously a positive thing as well. What I've also seen from a work dynamic, which I think is a real positive, that can only continue, is the level of communication in organisations has gone up, and the level of transparency required in that communication has gone up. And people are starting to trust employees a lot more. There's a lot more trust in working relationships. And I think employers are having to adapt really quickly. I think you can only expect to get about 80% of this right and these decisions that you're making right. And you've got to be a bit fearless to accept that in this situation, you are going to make some mistakes as an employer or a leader. But I think that openness and regularity in communication, if that continues in the working environment, then that for me is a positive as well.
Absolutely. We've had a question come in. I don't know if you've managed to see that, Dan, in the chat field from Hayley. She's sort of looking for some kind of, the situation she's finding herself in is that she's having to self-isolate, pick up the work of other staff who've needed to reduce their hours. So she's really kind of in a quite difficult situation where she's kind of, externally needs to really kind of keep a lid on things, greater good of the agency, keep face, etc. But potentially internally is really kind of struggling quite a bit with what she has to cope with.
So yeah, thank you, Hayley, for being really honest, and vulnerable with us here. Firstly, it's great that you're aware of it. That's often a big hurdle for myself. When I had to go through my own mental health crisis, a majority of it actually was actually getting to awareness. So the fact that you're aware of your state at the moment is actually one of the biggest hurdles. I'd say, remember, you are human at the end of the day. And there's only so much that you can do as a human. There's only so much that you can do, in your work day. And communicate with your team, communicate with your clients, communicate with your partners. This is really important right now. If you are struggling, you want something at the end of this. At the end of this whole crisis, you want to be able to still be able to do something. So communicate, be vulnerable with your team. And yes, others will be struggling too, but you'll all be in the same boat. And together, as long as we communicate in the relevant way, in the right way, then we can move forward. On top of that, as Michelle was noting, earlier, there are a lot of organizations out there who can help you with coping. So, Samaritans have been amazing for myself. I think I was one of the most common callers for stages of my own depression. But yeah, speak to them if you feel that you can't initially speak to your partner or your friends or even your colleagues. But communication for me and vulnerability is a big factor.
I think that's really important, Dan, and we have had another question in also, and it's kind of talking about similar sort of thing really in terms of having to bear the burden of having to keep the show on the road in a sense. And I think the topic that has come up, and Ross has mentioned this also, is about sort of part of the new normal is that we all need to kind of collectively accept that this is, it's all a little bit rough around the edges, and things aren't necessarily going to be as polished or as perfect as we might have wanted them to be, or what we were able to produce under normal circumstances. And I think it's a collective responsibility. I think often as well, as individuals, we can often take on the burden of the responsibility for kind of keeping the show on the road, but actually it's a collective responsibility, not only in a collective in the organization, but also across the industry as well, kind of really everyone being a bit kinder to each other to kind of know that things aren't always going to be
Definitely, it's one thing that we've had a conversation within Studio Republic internally. You know, we're collectively in it together to get through this crisis. But actually, on top of that, we've been really vulnerable with our clients to say, right, this is the situation right now. We've got this many staff on furlough, you know, and we've been completely open to them. And they've been really accepting of it as well. They've understood what our capacity is and what we can achieve, and we've respectfully looked at their budgets as well, you know, and so we're working together, you know, in the partnership way that we would always love to be with our clients as well. So I think this is really bringing the best out of a lot of people.
Wonderful. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A. Sorry, carry on, Michelle, please do.
I just wanted to build on what Dan was saying there. And in just a couple of these questions that have come through, I hope this doesn't sound too trite, but the word permission keeps coming to me here. There is giving ourselves permission to stop working. Could you, you know, can you put in your diary some of the 5 ways to well-being? So you're almost making an appointment with yourself and giving yourself permission to look after yourself. But it's also seeking permissions from our teams, from our line managers, from our leadership teams, from our clients and our suppliers. We need to ask for permission when we need to stop, when we need to work differently, when we need some help, when we need to talk, when we don't need to talk. So I think a lot of this is about having the courage to ask in lots of different ways and give ourselves and others permission.
Absolutely fab. So very quickly, as we move to wrapping up, got a couple of questions here. I'm going to pose them to you, Michelle. How to handle an employee that's openly expressing they can't cope with everyday life, but doesn't want to talk about it or accept any offer of help from employer. Next best step.
Just keep letting them know that you are there. Make sure that you keep signposting in a gentle but consistent way all of the different options of places and people that they could speak to, because it's that thing, they might not feel that they can talk to you, and that's nothing, you know, that's not anything against you. It's helping them find the person or organization or professional help or friend or peer or mental health first aider that they feel they can talk to. So it's presenting the benefits and the importance of talking about how they're feeling when they're ready. So if you can take out the pressure but gently keep there, being kind and really just encouraging them towards that conversation. But just remember, you can't make them.
Second question, thank you, regarding mental health first aiders. I know we can't really go into that now, but where should signpost to find out more about mental health first aid kind of training?
Me.
Okay, great.
You can talk to me about mental health first aid, or you can go to mhfaengland.org because there are loads of absolutely brilliant instructors, and that's always going to be a chemistry thing as well. So find the right instructor for you. You've got the 2-day mental health first aid. I do hope that they will bring it online. It'll have to be done in a different way, but it's so valuable. But the half days are really good. And if you are a mental health, if you're part of the crew that said that you are mental health first aiders, there's a refresher 4-hour course that has been created now, which is just a really nice way originally to just tap it back into those skills and the framework. But now, and I'll probably try and put one on at some point, if you're interested, let me know, to bring other mental health first aiders and create a forum for talking about the now and what's working and what isn't working, getting ideas from each other and refreshing your core skills.
Fabulous. Thank you, Michelle. I know we need to wrap. Was going to ask each of the panelists for their 3 takeouts, but let's just keep that to one key takeout from the discussions we've had this morning, really, if you had to focus on something. Ross.
So my key takeout would be use the power of learning to create connection and community at the moment, particularly for people who are on furlough. But the second thing I'm going to say, just to address Sophie's point in the chat about founders and the pressure that founders are under at the moment. I'm part of a founder myself, totally empathise, part of a founder support group every Thursday morning, 9 till 10. So if you want to get involved in that, we share peer-to-peer learning about all of the things that you've mentioned. It's ross@hidden.io, and I can help you with some of those points that you've made in the chat, but also you can come into the community and learn from other founders going through the same thing.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ross. Dan, key takeout from this morning's discussion, if there is just one?
I'll try and keep one. I do have three, but I will try and keep one. Because I know Michelle will probably tie up really nicely. So for me, I will say, as a leader, please encourage togetherness. Please encourage random acts of kindness within your organization. So even put in a Slack channel of little wins where you can all celebrate those little things that you do every day for each other. But also just include, if you've got staff on furlough, ensure that they are included in communication and still try and be together in the team. Yes, they can't do work, but they are still an employee. They are still a part of your team and a part of your family, to sound in that way. And make sure that they know that, with regards to the comment that was around, furlough, an employee going on furlough in May, just encourage them to still be active within your team, communicating what they're doing, ensuring that they know what's going on. That way they won't feel redundant. They won't feel that they need to go elsewhere.
Wonderful. Michelle, for you to the last comment for this morning.
What I would say is here's a very simple tool that you could even do as soon as you come off here, and there are two different ways that you can use it, and it's sort of Dan's given me the pressure of pulling everything together. Thanks, Dan. But if you think about everything that we've discussed and all the information that we've shared and given, for yourself, when you come off this call, don't move, close your eyes for 2 minutes and ask yourself, what do I need? What do I need? It might be one of the 5 ways to learning. It might be something else. What you will feel what you need. And then when you're in team situations, you don't have to do this every time, but maybe once a week as a team, before you start that team meeting, sit together, close your eyes, 2 minutes. What is needed? What is needed in this team, in this business right at this moment? And there's something just really, really powerful about being quiet, either with yourself or with other people for 2 minutes, to give you that moment of feeling really present, but kind of getting clarity, being creative, being innovative, but also tapping into what is needed right now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks to my colleagues from the BIMA Inclusion and Diversity Council, also to Michelle Morgan for joining us this morning. I'm going to pass back to Elise, who's just going to do the final wrap. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Nancy. And don't forget, if you have any other questions, Ross will be on Twitter now for 30 minutes. You can ask more questions. And I hope I'll see you all online shortly. Thank you.
Many thanks. Bye.